Payal Raina, founder of Fintech B2B Marketing Community. Welcome to Learning from Marketing Leaders, a series of one-on-one conversation with Fintech Advisory Board member who comprise the leading minds and possess a wealth of fantastic knowledge in financial services and technology space in B2B marketing. Today, I'm joined by Anoosha Livani, Director, UK Head of Marketing and Communication for Societe, Generale, Securities Services Bank, and is also an advisory board member for Fintech B2B Marketing Community. Anoosha, it's great to have you here today.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Great. Anoosha, you have got fantastic marketing experience for more than 2 decades, working for a number of global banks such as American Express, Lloyds Bank, Citibank. So tell our viewers and listeners about your fantastic career journey and how did you got into your current role?
Sure, thank you. So I guess I've been very lucky, I think, throughout my career. I've always worked with people that really value and see the importance of marketing. And certainly for the first 10 years or so, I didn't really actually work in a marketing team as such. I was always part of a management team or an investment team. So it's only really the last 10 years I've worked as part of a marketing team. And as well as marketing, I've done quite general marketing roles covering all aspects of the discipline. I've been lucky enough to do other things as well, so communications, perhaps investor relations, business development, certainly when I was in private equity, which I did for a number of years. And then more recently, the communications piece has been a bigger part, but I've also done product roles as well. So I think that's a good example of the transferable skills that we have as marketers. And I was working in regulatory and market strategy, which wouldn't seem an obvious place for me to sit, but I think the people who hired me took a bit of a gamble, if you like, but it was very much around taking what is actually quite complex, dry subject matter and making it accessible for both an internal and external audience. So I think that sort of breadth of experience is what I've always really enjoyed and certainly brought me to the role I'm in now. I've worked in very large organizations, as you've said, but I've also worked in smaller entrepreneurial organizations as well, where you're very visible, there's nowhere to hide, so that brings its advantages and disadvantages as well. So I feel very lucky to have had such a sort of range of experience and worked with great people as well. And certainly where I am at the moment, it was a relatively new business within the UK, but within an already very established wider business unit. So again, it's that sort of mixture of entrepreneurial, but with the structure that you get within a larger financial institution.
Wonderful. That sounds really exciting because, as you rightly said, the right mix of breadth and depth of experience is really important. And I think especially in this pandemic, you need to be quite flexible to kind of bring that agility and flexibility you need to be successful, which is quite inspiring to see. That's brilliant. Anoosha, one of the topics I know you're very, very passionate about is diversity and inclusion. And within financial services and technology space, the businesses are still trying to move the needle in the right direction. But of course, there's some gap around that. So would be good to kind of get your perspective and maybe perhaps going back to basics here to say, what does diversity and inclusion actually mean? There's a lot of noise around it. There's a lot of discussion around it, but love to share your insights.
So I guess, in terms of what it means to me, and because I've been working for quite a long time, it's sort of changed. When I started working, we didn't talk about diversity and inclusion, but I actually worked within a very diverse team of people in my first role. My second role, I was the only woman in a team of all men, and didn't even, it wasn't something that even figured in my conscience in terms of it being, difficult or challenging. So I consider myself lucky there. I guess if you look at diversity and inclusion, I think diversity of thought is so important. And again, as marketers, we're often in a very sort of pivotal position, especially, you know, in any organization. You're working across perhaps sales, product, compliance, communications. There might be regional, country management teams that you're having to work with as well. So often you're working with very diverse groups of people, perhaps with different objectives, different priorities, certainly different personalities. So as a marketer, you know, we're naturally adept at having to have quite an inclusive way of working anyway. If I think back again to me personally, you know, when I had my two children who are, you know, nearly 17 and 13 now, certainly when I had my daughter, I only knew of one other woman that worked full time. When I had my son 4 years later, it was a very different experience. Like, there were lots of parents at work. People were having to leave or work from home for childcare issues, and that was across, you know, men and women. So, you know, that's just a very sort of basic example, but something which, you know, really resonated with me and really helped me in terms of my progress and how I felt and how I felt comfortable in terms of workplace. I guess, you know, if I just sort of give a little anecdote, I remember at one place I was working, my manager at the time was very, very supportive of the sort of female talent agenda, but he didn't come to any of the women's networking events at our place of work. And that was a real issue for him. You know, he said, this is, you know, I'm struggling actually to figure out how to progress women of a certain, the VP level. How can I retain them and help them progress? And eventually, obviously, that changed, and, you know, men were allowed to join, and so on and so forth. And now that particular business, I think, has nearly 50% right the way through, right from, you know, associate right through to MD.
Wow.
You need that sort of, you know, that encouragement and that leadership, I think, is important. And something, again, I've been very lucky to have. But I think, you know, we look at the female agenda, not saying that that's done and dusted, but certainly we're now seeing other types of perhaps previously marginalized groups being represented more. There's still a long way to go, but you know, it's a conversation now. We're talking about it now, whereas perhaps even 10 years ago, even maybe 5 years ago, we weren't talking about it as much.
Yeah, you're right. You know, things have changed and moved since last decade, and I guess perhaps thanks to technology, social media, which have helped us to get the voice out very quickly and accelerated it. But of course, you know, there's still a long way to go, as you said. So now, given I've got some stats here, it says that a truly diverse boardroom delivers a 95% of higher return on equity, as per leading research. I think it begs the question about, from a marketer standpoint, Anoosha, it's like, what can we do within our organizations which can help us to kind of, you know, amplify the D&I on the business agenda from our perspective? So yeah, what would be your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because often marketers are, you know, we're portraying the voice of the company. And it may be what's felt internally is perhaps different to the outside world perception. And I think, you know, exactly to your point, I think the importance now, we've got hard data and facts. So I think McKinsey have been running research for a number of years now across, I think it's 1,000 companies in 15 countries. And when you look at crisis situations, so if we look at the 2008 crisis, for example, companies that had more inclusive management teams and boards tended to be more resilient. Now, the problem then was that the D&I piece sort of slipped down the agenda, if you like, whereas now we're obviously in another crisis situation, and there is perhaps a risk again that D&I focus is going to slip down the agenda. That said, what we are seeing now is more statistical importance, I guess, being attached So I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of quotas, but quotas for female representation on boards was brought in because there was a lot of talk and not a lot of action. And now we've had the Hamilton review, which took place last year, which is looking at BAME representation in boards. I think the aim was to have one by 2021, so at least one BAME representative on each of the FTSE 100 boards by 2021. I think we're at 50%, so that's not going to be achieved. But then you've also got some companies, I think Legal & General recently announced that they would not invest in a fund unless there was BAME representation. Mm-hmm. Starting to see more people really sort of putting their money where their mouth is, actually, in terms of diversity and inclusion. Mm-hmm. Actually, a diverse and inclusive management team, the statistics are showing and the data is showing, actually perform better in the long run. So it's not just a nice to have box ticking exercise. Yeah. There's a valid commercial business reason for doing this. And as marketers, you know, we want our business to reflect our customer base. Mm-hmm. So, you know, if our customer base is incredibly diverse, which typically it will be, we need to have that reflected in terms of the management teams and the leadership.
Yeah, no, I think I completely agree with you, and it's great to kind of hear those examples, and perhaps Nasdaq recently they kind of came up with some really strong initiative about delisting the companies for the businesses mm-hmm. who are not meeting their D&I. Yeah. So that's probably another great examples, and it has sent some strong signals.
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much, Anoosha, for your wonderful insights. I'm sure our community members and our listeners and viewers found it really useful. One of the things we ask all our guests is their top tip or advice for marketers looking ahead in 2021. So what are your pearls of wisdom going to be here for us?
Okay, so I think certainly we've all proved to ourselves that in the this last year that we can adapt to very uncertain times. So I think that's something that we really need to be mindful of as we go into the new year. And often that means, you know, trying out new things, figuring out sort of new challenges. So whether that's because different organizations are using different platforms, whether it's Zoom, MS Teams to engage with their clients, you know, that presents a challenge in itself. But also in terms of internally, you know, influencing your stakeholders and making sure that people are on board and willing to try new things, because we're all having to adapt and try and do different things differently. So I think that's the first one, and that's key. Secondly, there's certain trends that, you know, have been prevalent for a while, whether it's digitization, ESG, and I'm talking obviously from the perspective of the business that I work in. I guess that this year has really accelerated that. So digitization, it might be the use of e-signatures, it's remote working, and how we manage that more effectively and more quickly, business continuity, operational resilience, for example. If you look at ESG, and exactly as we were just talking just now in terms of the diversity and inclusion, I think the S of ESG is going to be really, really important. So whether that's in terms of gender or ethnic diversity, but also things like social mobility. You're seeing companies now bringing on apprenticeships, which perhaps wouldn't have been done before. So again, as well as being reflective of your client base in terms of, you know, culture and ethnicity and gender, it's also around the social mobility and social inclusion as well. I think that's really important and going to be an area there's going to be a lot of focus on. And then finally, I guess it's relationship capital. You know, as marketers and in, you know, any business, the people side of things is always important and absolutely key. So having that relationship capital, having good relationships, whether it's with your suppliers, with your co-workers, with your journalists, whoever it is so important, and has, especially as we're all working in a remote, you know, environment. So your face-to-face contact is very limited, obviously. The challenge again is when it comes to things like new business, how do you develop those new relationships in a remote working environment? So I think that's something we're all going to be more mindful of, and whether it means, the absence of physical events for a little while, that's hopefully going to change, but, is it ever going to get back to how it was before? Probably not. So, we're again having to adapt to that and see how we can evolve.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anoosha. I think that was a great piece of advice, and I'm sure our marketers are going to bear that in mind and try to keep that top tips when they are actually implementing some of their plans and strategy at their workplace. So once again, thank you so much, Anoosha, for your time, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Payal.
And I would like to thank you, our fantastic, lovely listeners and viewers today for your time and patience. I hope you found this interview useful. I do want to say that diversity and inclusion is something is very close to the heart of our community, and we would be launching a D&I series. So stay tuned, and if you would like to participate in these conversations and discussions and contribute, then please do not hesitate to contact us at Fintech B2B Marketing.com. Until then, we're going to see you again with another exciting guest. Thank you.